Sarah woke in the freezing barn to find the wild mare Liberty pressed against her on the narrow cot, a boundary cross that no wild horse had ever willingly breached before. In that heart-stopping moment, as Liberty's dark, intelligent eyes met hers, Sarah realized what lay beneath the mare's unprecedented gesture would forever change how humans understood wildness itself. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dawn broke over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood on the weathered porch of her veterinary clinic, which doubled as her home, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands against the early morning chill. Her eyes scanned the sprawling hills that surrounded her property, a sanctuary she had built from nothing after leaving her prestigious position at a city hospital. This remote corner of Montana had become her refuge, a place where her love for animals and her medical expertise found purpose, far from the chaos of urban life. Sarah took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air. 5 years had passed since she'd traded her sterile hospital corridors for these open spaces, exchanging human patients for four-legged ones. The decision had raised eyebrows among her colleagues, but Sarah never looked back. Here, among the forgotten corners of the wild, she had found her calling. The peaceful morning routine was interrupted by the urgent sound of her phone ringing. Sarah frowned, setting down her coffee mug on the wooden railing. Calls this early rarely brought good news. "Dr. Mitchell speaking," she answered, her voice still carrying traces of sleep. "Sarah, it's Tom Jackson from the Northern Ridge." The man's voice was tense, his breathing heavy. "I've got a situation here. Found a wild mare down by Eagle Creek. She's in bad shape, looks pregnant, but something's wrong. She's collapsed and bleeding." Sarah's mind immediately shifted into professional mode. "How far from the road is she?" "About half a mile into the brush. I can take you there, but we'll need to hurry. She doesn't look good." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't approach her. Just keep an eye from a distance," Sarah instructed, already moving toward her medical supplies. The drive to Eagle Creek took Sarah through winding dirt roads that snaked across the rugged terrain. Her old truck bounced and jostled over the uneven surface as her mind raced through possible scenarios. Wild horses roamed these parts, descendants of escaped ranch horses that had adapted to the harsh landscape over generations. They rarely approached human settlements, preferring the freedom of the untamed wilderness. Tom was waiting by his faded blue pickup, his weathered face lined with concern. At 65, he was one of the oldest ranchers in the area, with a deep respect for the land and its creatures that Sarah had always admired. "She's still there," he said simply, pointing toward a dense cluster of trees near the creek bed. "Hasn't moved since I found her." Sarah nodded, grabbing her medical bag. "Show me." They trekked in silence through the underbrush, the sound of running water growing louder with each step. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. As they approached a small clearing, Sarah saw her, a magnificent bay mare with a dark mane, lying on her side beside the creek. Even in her distress, the mare's wild beauty was striking. Her coat, though dulled by dirt and sweat, still caught the sunlight, revealing hints of deep chestnut. But what struck Sarah most were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and filled with a mixture of pain and defiance. "She's been here at least since dawn," Tom whispered. "I noticed her while checking my fences." Sarah approached slowly, her movements measured and deliberate. The mare's flanks heaved with labored breathing, and Sarah could see the extended abdomen that confirmed Tom's observation about her pregnancy. A small pool of blood had formed beneath the animal, and flies buzzed around it in the morning heat. "Easy, girl," Sarah murmured, her voice soft and steady. "I'm here to help." The mare's ears flickered toward the sound, but she remained still, too weak to attempt flight. Sarah knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance as she assessed the situation. Years of working with wild animals had taught her the delicate balance between intervention and respect. Her examination confirmed her fears. The mare was in labor, but something was obstructing the birth. Without immediate help, both mother and foal would die. "Tom, I need to get her back to my clinic," Sarah said, never taking her eyes off the mare. "She needs surgery, and I can't do it here." Tom's brow furrowed. "How are we going to move a wild horse in labor?" "We'll need to sedate her and use your truck. I've got a horse trailer at the clinic. Can you drive back and get it?" Within the hour, they had managed to carefully transport the sedated mare to Sarah's clinic. With Tom's help, they settled the animal on the large examination table in the barn that served as Sarah's operating room. The mare's breathing had become more labored, her body trembling with effort and pain. Sarah worked methodically, her hands steady despite the urgency of the situation. "The foal is positioned wrong," she explained to Tom, who stood by to assist. "It's a breech birth, and there's another complication I can't quite identify yet." Time seemed to stretch as Sarah fought to save the wild mare and her unborn foal. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, the familiar calm of focused medical work settling over her. This was why she had come here to this remote place, for moments like these when her skills meant the difference between life and death for creatures that had no voice of their own. After what felt like hours, Sarah straightened, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "The foal is free, but it's not breathing," she said, her voice tight with emotion as she held the tiny, motionless body. Tom's face fell. The loss of new life, always a heavy burden in ranch country. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. With practiced movements, she cleared the foal's airways and began gentle chest compressions, a technique she had adapted from her years in human medicine. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet barn. "Your mother fought too hard for you to give up now." As if responding to her plea, the foal suddenly jerked, its tiny chest expanding with a first, desperate breath. A small, weak whimper followed, the sound bringing a smile to Sarah's exhausted face. "That's it," she encouraged, gently rubbing the foal's body with clean towels to stimulate circulation. "That's it." With the foal breathing on its own, Sarah turned her attention back to the mare, who remained unconscious from the sedation but stable. Something still troubled Sarah about the birth. There had been more blood than usual, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important. As she ran her hands along the mare's distended abdomen, she felt it, a slight movement, distinct from the mare's breathing. "Tom," she called, her voice tight with disbelief. "Get me the ultrasound, I need to check something." The rancher moved quickly, bringing the portable machine that was one of Sarah's most valuable tools. She applied the gel to the mare's belly and watched the screen intently, her breath catching as the image confirmed her suspicion. "I don't believe it," she whispered, turning the screen so Tom could see. "There's another foal. She's carrying twins." Tom's eyes widened. "Is that rare?" "In horses? Extremely. And usually one or both don't survive." Sarah's mind raced. Twin births in horses were not only uncommon, but often dangerous for both the mare and the foals. The fact that one had already been delivered successfully was remarkable. "We need to act quickly," she said, already preparing for a second delivery. "The mare's been through a lot, and this second foal is in distress." Outside, the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Inside the barn, Sarah fought another battle against time, her determination unwavering as she worked to bring a second miracle into the world. The second delivery proved even more difficult than the first. The twin foal was smaller, weaker, positioned awkwardly in the womb. Sarah's arms ached from the effort, her scrubs soaked with sweat as she worked to guide the tiny life into the world. Tom remained by her side, passing instruments, holding lights, his weathered hands steady despite the tension that filled the room. "Almost there," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Tom. Her fingers found purchase, guiding the foal's front legs through the birth canal. Just a little more. With one final careful movement, the second foal slipped free. Unlike its sibling, this one made no sound, its tiny body limp and still in Sarah's hands. She immediately cleared its airways and began the same resuscitation procedure, her movements more urgent this time. The foal's chances diminished with each passing second. "Oxygen," she instructed Tom, who quickly handed her the mask from the nearby tank. Sarah placed it over the foal's muzzle, her other hand performing gentle chest compressions. "Come on, little fighter, your family's waiting for you." For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Then, so faint Sarah almost missed it, a flutter of movement. The foal's chest rose slightly, followed by a weak, shuddering breath. Sarah continued her efforts, her focus absolute, until the tiny creature let out a soft, plaintive sound that filled the room with relief. "That's twice you've worked miracles today," Tom said quietly, the awe evident in his voice. Sarah shook her head, a weary smile crossing her face. "No miracles, just science and a whole lot of stubbornness." She gently placed the second foal next to its stronger sibling in the warming pen she'd prepared. "These two aren't out of the woods yet, and neither is their mother." The mare remained unconscious, her vital signs stable but weak. Sarah administered antibiotics and fluids, concerned about infection and blood loss. Wild horses carried various parasites and bacteria that domestic ones didn't, making treatment more complex. She would need to monitor the mare closely through the night. "You should get some rest," Tom suggested, noting the fatigue etched on Sarah's face. "I can stay for a while. Keep an eye on them." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, pushing back strands that had escaped her ponytail during the intense hours of work. "Thanks, Tom, but I need to monitor her closely for the next few hours. You head home. I'll call if anything changes." After Tom reluctantly departed, Sarah settled into the old armchair she kept in the barn for nights like these. She positioned it where she could observe all three patients, the mare on the examination table, temporarily converted to a recovery bed, and the two foals in their warming pen, huddled together for comfort. The quiet hum of medical equipment filled the space, a sound that had once been the backdrop to Sarah's life in the hospital. Now it seemed out of place in the rustic barn with its wooden beams and hay-scented air. Yet the familiar rhythm was comforting as she fought against the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. Sarah checked her watch, just past midnight. She stood, stretching her stiff muscles, and approached the mare to check her vitals. The wild horse's breathing had steadied, her pulse stronger than before. A good sign. The sedation would wear off soon, which presented its own challenges. Wild horses didn't take kindly to waking up in unfamiliar surroundings, especially with humans nearby. As if sensing Sarah's thoughts, the mare's eyelids fluttered. Sarah stepped back, giving the animal space while staying close enough to intervene if necessary. The mare's eyes opened fully, dark and disoriented, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings before landing on Sarah. "Easy, girl," Sarah said softly, keeping her posture non-threatening. "You're safe. Your babies are safe." The mare attempted to rise but was too weak, her legs trembling with the effort. Panic flashed in her eyes, a wild animal's instinctive response to vulnerability. Sarah remained still, speaking in low, soothing tones until the mare settled, her ears flickering toward the sounds of her foals nearby. "That's it," Sarah encouraged. "They need you to rest and recover." As if understanding, the mare's gaze shifted to the warming pen where her offspring lay. A soft nickering sound escaped her, a mother's call to her young. The stronger foal responded with a weak whimper, while the smaller one remained silent, conserving its limited energy. Sarah carefully approached the warming pen and lifted the stronger foal, moving slowly to avoid startling the mare. "Let's introduce you to your mom," she whispered to the tiny creature. With gentle movements, she placed the foal near its mother's head, allowing them to see and smell each other. The mare stretched her neck, nostrils flaring as she took in the scent of her offspring. The foal, still unsteady on its new legs, wobbled closer until its small muzzle touched its mother's. The connection between them was immediate and profound, a natural bond that transcended their unusual circumstances. Sarah repeated the process with the smaller twin, whose breathing remained labored but stable. This foal made no sound, but its eyes, barely open, seemed to seek out its mother. The mare nuzzled it gently, a look of recognition passing between them that brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. The emotional weight of the day suddenly crashed over her. Sarah retreated to her chair, giving the small family their space while keeping a watchful eye. These moments, witnessing the raw, pure connection between animals, were why she had left her lucrative career behind. No sterile hospital room could offer the soul-deep satisfaction of seeing wild creatures fight for life and find it against all odds. As the night deepened, Sarah documented her observations in a weathered notebook, recording vital signs and treatments. The mare had suffered significant trauma and blood loss, but her body was strong, tempered by the harsh realities of wild living. The foals were another matter, particularly the smaller twin, whose breathing remained worryingly shallow. Sarah must have dozed off because she awoke with a start to the sound of movement. The mare had somehow managed to slide off the examination table and was now standing shakily but upright, beside the warming pen containing her foals. Instead of attempting to flee, as Sarah might have expected, the wild horse remained focused entirely on her offspring. "Well, look at you," Sarah said softly, impressed by the animal's determination. "Motherhood is a powerful motivator, isn't it?" The mare's ears swiveled toward Sarah's voice, but her attention remained fixed on her foals. Sarah watched, fascinated, as the mare gently nudged the pen with her nose, as if trying to reach her babies. Making a quick decision, Sarah carefully lifted the barrier separating them. The stronger foal immediately wobbled to its feet, instinctively seeking its mother. With a tenderness that belied her wild nature, the mare guided her stronger offspring toward her side. The foal, operating on pure instinct, searched for milk, its tiny mouth rooting until it found what it sought. The mare stood perfectly still, allowing her child to take the nourishment it needed. The second, smaller twin remained in the warming pen, too weak to stand. Sarah watched as the mare looked between her nursing foal and the one still separated from her, a distinct distress evident in her posture. Making another judgment call, Sarah gently lifted the weaker foal and brought it to its mother's side, supporting its weight as it, too, attempted to nurse. "That's it," Sarah encouraged, her voice barely above a whisper. "They need your strength now." As the dawn approached, casting pale light through the barn windows, Sarah found herself witness to a moment of profound resilience. A wild mare, far from her natural habitat, fighting for her life and the lives of her unexpected twins. It was a scene that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier, yet here it was, unfolding before her tired eyes. Sarah knew the challenges ahead remained significant. The mare would need time to recover, the foals required constant monitoring, and eventually, difficult decisions would need to be made about their future. Wild animals belonged in the wild, yet these three might never have survived without intervention. The first week passed in a blur of constant vigilance. Sarah converted the isolation stall in her barn into a makeshift recovery room, giving the mare and her foals a safe, quiet space to heal. She'd anticipated resistance from the wild horse, perhaps aggression or constant attempts to escape. Instead, The mare displayed a remarkable acceptance of her circumstances, her maternal instinct seemingly overriding her fear of captivity. Sarah named the mare Liberty, a tribute to her wild spirit. The stronger foal, a colt with a white star on his forehead, she called Chance, for the second chance at life he'd been given. The smaller twin, a filly whose survival remained precarious, became Hope, representing what Sarah felt each time the tiny creature made it through another night. Hope remained the greatest concern. Unlike her brother, who grew stronger daily, the filly struggled to nurse effectively and required supplemental feeding. Sarah spent hours each day sitting beside Liberty, bottle feeding the weak foal while the mare watched with intelligent, wary eyes. "She's a fighter, like her mother," Sarah told Tom during one of his regular visits to check on the Wild family. They stood at the stall door observing Liberty gently nuzzling Hope, who lay curled against her mother's warm belly. "Never seen anything like it," Tom admitted, shaking his head in wonder. "Wild mare letting you handle her foals, staying calm in a barn, it's not natural." "She understands we're helping," Sarah said, though she shared Tom's amazement. The bond forming between her and Liberty defied explanation, a tenuous trust built on necessity and survival. On the 10th day, Sarah arrived at the barn before sunrise, her routine now dictated by her patient's needs. The moment she opened the door, she sensed something was wrong. Liberty stood in the corner of the stall, her posture tense, protective. The mare's ears were pinned back, her eyes wide with alarm. "Liberty?" Sarah approached slowly, her voice calm despite the concern building in her chest. "What's wrong, girl?" As she drew closer, she saw the cause of the mare's distress. Hope lay motionless in the straw, her tiny body unnaturally still. Sarah's heart sank as she knelt beside the foal, her fingers searching for a pulse she already knew wouldn't be there. The little filly had fought valiantly, but her struggle had ended sometime in the night. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered both to Hope and to Liberty, who watched from her corner, sensing the gravity of the moment. Chance stood close to his mother, his gangly legs still unsteady but growing stronger each day. Grief settled over Sarah like a physical weight. Despite her years of veterinary experience, losing a patient never became easier. Each loss carried its own unique pain, and Hope's death felt particularly cruel after the miracle of her birth. Liberty approached cautiously, her nostrils flaring as she nuzzled her still foal. The mare made a soft, mournful sound that tightened Sarah's throat with emotion. She stepped back, giving Liberty space to process her loss in whatever way wild horses did. Later that morning, Sarah buried Hope beneath the large oak tree that stood sentinel over her property. Tom helped in silence, understanding that words offered little comfort. When they finished, Sarah stood looking down at the small mound of fresh earth, wondering if she could have done more. "You gave her 10 days she wouldn't have had," Tom finally said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Some creatures just aren't meant for this world." Sarah nodded, though the rational part of her mind that accepted the harsh realities of nature offered little solace to her heart. "I need to check on Liberty and Chance," she said, turning away from the grave. Back in the barn, she found Liberty standing protectively over Chance, who had curled up in the straw for a nap. The mare's eyes met Sarah's, and in that moment, something shifted between them. A shared grief, perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Liberty didn't retreat when Sarah entered the stall, instead remaining still as the veterinarian approached. "It's just us now," Sarah said softly, extending her hand palm up. To her surprise, Liberty lowered her head, allowing Sarah to touch her neck for the first time without resistance. The contact was brief but significant, a wild animal choosing connection over flight. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to the barn. Chance grew rapidly, his coat gleaming with health, his legs strengthening until he could frolic around the stall in short, exuberant bursts. Liberty recovered more slowly, the trauma of her difficult birth and subsequent loss taking its toll. But each day brought improvement, and Sarah began to consider what would come next. Wild horses belonged in the wild. This was a truth Sarah held firmly. Yet Liberty had been alone when found, separated from any herd, and a solitary mare with a foal faced poor odds against predators and harsh conditions. The ethical questions weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she watched Liberty and Chance grow stronger under her care. 3 weeks after the birth, Sarah made a decision. She would begin gradually introducing Liberty and Chance to her fenced pasture, a 20-acre expanse that offered freedom to roam while maintaining the safety they still needed. It would be the first step in a longer journey, one whose end Sarah couldn't yet see clearly. The morning she planned to move them, Sarah arrived at the barn to find an unexpected scene. Liberty stood in the middle of her stall, but something about her posture seemed off. As Sarah drew closer, she realized with alarm that the mare was swaying slightly, her normally alert eyes dull with pain. "Liberty." Sarah entered the stall quickly, professional concern overriding caution. Chance nickered from the corner, seemingly aware of his mother's distress. When Sarah reached Liberty, she placed a hand on the mare's flank and felt intense heat radiating through the coat. Fever, and a high one. A thorough examination revealed the cause. An infection had set in at the site of Liberty's birth trauma, hidden from detection until now. The mare had been stoically hiding her pain, an instinct that served wild animals well in nature but complicated medical treatment. "You need to lie down," Sarah told Liberty, guiding the mare gently to the straw-covered floor. "I need to treat this immediately." To Sarah's surprise, Liberty followed her direction, carefully lowering herself to the ground. The trust that had been building between them manifested in this moment of vulnerability, a wild mare accepting human help when she needed it most. Sarah worked quickly, administering antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, cleaning the infected area with practiced hands. Liberty remained still throughout the procedure, her eyes occasionally finding Sarah's face as if seeking reassurance. "You're going to be okay," Sarah promised, though worry gnawed at her. Infections could progress rapidly, and Liberty's wild constitution might react differently to medications than a domestic horse's would. All she could do was provide the best care possible and hope the mare's natural resilience would do the rest. That night, Sarah made a decision that went against her usual professional boundaries. Instead of returning to her house, she dragged a cot into the barn and set it up outside Liberty's stall. The mare needed monitoring through the night, and Sarah wasn't willing to risk losing her to a complication that might arise in the dark hours. As she settled onto the uncomfortable cot, her medical bag within easy reach, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. A month ago, Liberty had been a wild creature roaming free, unknown to her. Now, Sarah found herself sleeping in a barn to watch over this same mare, their lives unexpectedly intertwined by circumstance and something that felt remarkably like mutual respect. Chance approached the stall door, poking his curious face through the bars to investigate this new development. Sarah reached up to stroke his velvety muzzle, smiling despite her worry. "Your mom's tough," she told him quietly. "Wild things usually are." From her place on the straw, Liberty watched the interaction, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the barn. Though fever dulled her gaze, Sarah could still see the intelligence there, and something else that might have been gratitude or might simply been a human projection onto an animal whose true thoughts would always remain a mystery. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Moonlight filtered through the barn windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She sat up quickly, her back protesting after hours on the hard cot. Liberty. That was why she was here. She turned toward the stall, fear gripping her heart at what she might find. To her relief, Liberty was standing, her head lowered to nuzzle Chance, who slept peacefully in the straw. The mare's posture seemed stronger, more stable than it had been hours earlier. Sarah approached quietly, not wanting to startle either of them. "Hey there," she whispered, reaching for her thermometer. Liberty's ears flicked toward the sound, but she remained still, allowing Sarah to check her temperature. The reading brought a smile to Sarah's tired face. The fever had broken, dropping to a much safer level. The antibiotics were working. "Good girl," Sarah said, running a gentle hand along Liberty's neck. The mare leaned slightly into the touch, a small gesture that felt monumental coming from a wild animal. In that quiet moment, illuminated only by moonlight, Sarah felt a connection to Liberty that transcended the typical boundaries between human and wild creature. For the next few days, Sarah maintained her vigilant care, administering medication and changing dressings. Liberty's infection gradually retreated, her strength returning with each passing day. Chance continued to thrive, his playful energy filling the barn with life and sound that made Sarah smile despite her exhaustion. A week after Liberty's fever, Sarah decided it was time. The wild mare had recovered enough for the next step in their journey, introduction to the pasture. She waited for a quiet morning, the kind where the Montana air hung still and sweet over the land. "Today's the day," she told Liberty as she entered the stall with a specially designed halter, looser than standard, providing control without causing distress to a horse unaccustomed to restraint. Liberty eyed the equipment warily, her nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent of leather. "It's okay," Sarah soothed, approaching slowly. "This is just to help us get to somewhere better, somewhere with grass and sky." Whether Liberty understood the words or simply responded to Sarah's calm demeanor, the mare allowed the halter to be slipped over her head with minimal resistance. Chance, curious as always, sniffed at the strange object on his mother's face before dancing away on his increasingly coordinated legs. Leading Liberty from the barn proved surprisingly straightforward. The mare followed Sarah's gentle guidance, Chance trotting alongside without need for restraint. When they emerged into the morning sunlight, Liberty stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the expanse of open space before her. Sarah held her breath, giving the mare time to process this new development. Liberty's nostrils flared as she took in the scents of grass, trees, and open air, smells of freedom that must have awakened something primal within her. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah wondered if the mare would bolt, taking Chance with her in a desperate dash for liberty that matched her name. Instead, Liberty took a tentative step forward, then another, following Sarah toward the large pasture that awaited them. The 20 acres were securely fenced, but offered a taste of the freedom wild horses craved. When they reached the gate, Sarah removed the halter, stepping back to give Liberty choice. The mare remained still for several long seconds, looking from Sarah to the open pasture and back again. Then, with a soft, nickering sound to Chance, she stepped through the gate. The foal followed eagerly, his little hooves kicking up tufts of grass as he explored this exciting new world. Sarah leaned against the fence, watching as Liberty took her first cautious steps across the pasture. The mare's movements were stiff at first, her body remembering the trauma it had endured. But gradually, her stride lengthened, her head raised higher, the sunlight catching the ripple of muscles beneath her coat. Chance, less inhibited, raced in joyful circles around his mother, testing his growing strength with each bound. The sight brought tears to Sarah's eyes, not of sadness this time, but of something like pride mixed with bittersweet recognition. This was what healing looked like, not just physical recovery, but the return of spirit, of essential nature. Over the following days, a routine developed. Liberty and Chance spent daylight hours in the pasture, returning to the familiar safety of the barn stall at night. Sarah expected the transition to be challenging, but Liberty seemed to understand the rhythm, leading Chance back to the barn each evening without resistance. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, Sarah arrived at the pasture one morning to find Tom's truck parked near the gate. The old rancher stood watching Liberty and Chance, his weathered face thoughtful. "Morning," Sarah called as she approached, coffee in hand. "You're out early." Tom nodded toward the pasture. "Been watching them for a while. That mare's something special." "She is," Sarah agreed, following his gaze to where Liberty grazed peacefully, Chance never far from her side. "I've never seen anything like her." "Word's getting around about what you did," Tom said after a moment. "Saving a wild mare and her twins. People are talking." Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just doing my job." "No." Tom shook his head firmly. "What you did goes beyond veterinary duty. Most would have put her down, called it mercy. Easier that way." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A shiny black SUV with government plates rolled up the dirt road, dust billowing behind it. Sarah's stomach tightened with apprehension. A tall woman in a crisp uniform emerged from the driver's side, her posture rigid with authority. The emblem on her jacket identified her as Bureau of Land Management, the federal agency responsible for managing wild horse populations on public lands. "Dr. Mitchell?" the woman asked, approaching with a clipboard in hand. "I'm Agent Diane Foster, BLM. I understand you're housing a wild mare and foal on your property." Sarah straightened, instinctively defensive. "I am. The mare was critically injured and pregnant. I provided emergency medical care." Agent Foster nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "I'm not here to cause problems, Doctor. We've received reports about your rescue and wanted to verify the situation. Wild horses are protected under federal law." "I'm aware of the law," Sarah said more sharply than she intended. "Liberty, the mare, was dying when she was found. Both she and her foal would be dead without intervention." The agent's expression softened slightly at Sarah's protective tone. "May I see them?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded, leading Agent Foster to the fence. Liberty had noticed the newcomer, her posture alert but not alarmed as she watched from a distance. Chance remained behind his mother, peering curiously at the stranger. "Beautiful animals," Foster commented, genuine appreciation in her voice. "The foal looks healthy." "He is. We lost his twin sister shortly after birth." Foster made another note, then turned to face Sarah directly. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to be clear about something. While I appreciate the emergency care you provided, wild horses can't be privately owned. They're federal property managed under the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act." Sarah felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that once the mare has recovered sufficiently, she and her foal will need to be relocated to a BLM holding facility. From there, they'll either be placed for adoption or returned to a designated herd management area." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd known rationally that Liberty and Chance couldn't stay with her indefinitely. Yet hearing the clinical bureaucracy that would determine their fate made her chest tighten with an emotion she hadn't expected: loss. "They're not ready," she said, struggling to keep her voice professional. "Liberty is still recovering from a serious infection, and Chance is too young for relocation." Foster nodded, seemingly sympathetic despite her official manner. "I understand. That's why I'm here for an assessment, not immediate removal. We'll need documentation of their medical condition and a timeline for rehabilitation." Tom, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke. "These horses know Dr. Mitchell. They trust her. Shipping them off to some government corral will undo all the healing they've done." The agent sighed, looking from Tom to Sarah. "I don't make the laws, sir, I just enforce them. Wild horses require special management, especially given the overpopulation issues we're facing. As the adults spoke, Chance had grown bolder, venturing closer to the fence where they stood. His curious eyes and playful demeanor seemed oblivious to the serious conversation determining his future. Sarah watched him, a sense of determination hardening within her. These weren't just anonymous wild animals anymore. They were Liberty and Chance, survivors who had fought against impossible odds, who had formed bonds of trust that defied their wild nature. "I'd like to apply for their adoption," Sarah said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in her mind as she spoke. "Officially, through proper channels." Agent Foster's eyebrows rose slightly, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine surprise. "You want to adopt them?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice growing more confident with each word. "I have the facilities, the knowledge to care for them properly, and they're already comfortable here." Foster studied Sarah for a long moment, then glanced back at Liberty and Chance in the pasture. "The adoption process isn't simple, Dr. Mitchell. There are home inspections, fees, specific requirements for fencing and shelter, and even then, the title doesn't transfer fully for a year." "I understand," Sarah said firmly. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Tom cleared his throat. "If it helps any, I can vouch for the doctor. This entire community can. You won't find anyone more qualified or committed." Foster nodded, making more notes on her clipboard. "I'll need to take photographs and measurements, review their medical records, and file a formal report. No promises, but I'll note your interest in adoption." Relief flooded through Sarah, though she knew this was just the beginning of what would likely be a complicated process. "Thank you. When would you like to start the assessment?" "Now, if possible," Foster replied, her demeanor shifting back to efficient professionalism. "I'd like to document their current condition and examine your facilities." The next few hours passed in a blur of documentation and questions. Foster photographed Liberty and Chance from various angles, measured the fencing around the pasture, inspected the barn, and reviewed Sarah's meticulous medical records. Through it all, Sarah answered questions about the rescue, Liberty's injuries, and the birth of the twins, careful to emphasize the exceptional circumstances that had led to her intervention. "One last question," Foster said as they finished the tour, standing once again at the pasture fence. "Why are you doing this? Most veterinarians understand the protocols for wild horses. They provide emergency care and notify the BLM immediately." Sarah took a moment to gather her thoughts, watching as Liberty grazed peacefully, Chance napping in the shade nearby. "When I found her, she was dying, alone, in pain, fighting to bring her foals into the world. Something happened during those hours we spent together." She paused, seeking words for an experience that defied easy explanation. "We formed a connection. She trusts me in a way that shouldn't be possible with a wild horse. Breaking that trust now feels wrong." Foster's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate your honesty, but I need to be clear. The BLM's primary concern is what's best for these animals as wild horses, not as potential pets." "I'm not looking for pets," Sarah countered, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I want to give them a sanctuary where they can heal completely and live with the dignity their wild nature deserves. Liberty may never be truly tame, and I don't want her to be. I just want to protect what we've built together." The agent nodded, closing her notebook with a decisive snap. "I'll submit my report today. You should receive notification about next steps within 2 weeks." She handed Sarah a business card. "Call me if there are any changes in their condition before then." After Foster departed, Sarah and Tom stood in silence, watching the dust settle on the road. "You sure about this?" Tom finally asked, his voice gentle. "Taking on wild horses is different from treating them. They're never fully yours, not really." Sarah smiled, a small, private expression. I know. That's part of why I want to do it. They deserve someone who understands that. The days following Foster's visit passed in a strange limbo. Sarah continued caring for Liberty and Chance as before, but now a countdown seemed to hover over every interaction. Each moment felt more precious, knowing their future remained uncertain. Liberty continued to improve physically, though she would always bear scars from her ordeal. The mare moved with increasing grace across the pasture, her coat regaining the glossy sheen of health. Chance grew rapidly, his gangly legs carrying him in ever-widening explorations of his world, always circling back to his mother's protective presence. A week after Foster's visit, Sarah decided to try something new. Instead of leading Liberty back to the barn in the evening, she left the gate open, giving the mare the choice to come and go as she pleased. Tom had warned against it. Give a wild thing too much freedom too soon, and you might never see it again. But Sarah felt it was a necessary step, both for Liberty's recovery and for her own peace of mind. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the pasture as dusk gathered. The usual time for Liberty's return to the barn had passed, and the mare remained in the far corner of the pasture, Chance at her side. Sarah felt a heaviness in her chest but forced herself to remain on the porch, respecting Liberty's choice. Night fell completely, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky. Sarah finally stood, preparing to go inside, when movement at the edge of the pasture caught her eye. Liberty was walking slowly, deliberately toward the barn, Chance trotting alongside her. Sarah held her breath as the mare reached the open gate, pausing for a long moment as if weighing a profound decision. Then, with the same dignity that had marked her throughout her ordeal, Liberty walked through the gate, across the yard, and into the barn. Chance followed, his trust in his mother absolute. Sarah waited several minutes before following, giving them time to settle. When she entered the barn, she found them in their stall, Liberty standing watchful while Chance nestled in the fresh straw. "You came back," Sarah whispered, not bothering to hide the emotion in her voice. Liberty's ears flickered toward the sound, her dark eyes reflecting the dim barn light. In that moment, Sarah understood something fundamental about Liberty. True freedom included the choice to return, to accept connection without compulsion. The following days established a new rhythm. The gate remained open, and each evening Liberty chose to return to the barn, a decision that felt like a gift rather than an obligation. Sarah documented this development in her journal, building a case for adoption that went beyond medical necessity to something deeper, a mutual choosing that honored both Liberty's wild nature and the bond they had formed. 12 days after Foster's visit, Sarah's phone rang with a Montana area code she didn't recognize. "Dr. Mitchell? This is Diane Foster from the BLM." Sarah's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes, hello. I'm calling about your adoption application for the wild mare and foal." Sarah closed her eyes, bracing herself. "And?" "There's been a complication," Foster said, her tone giving nothing away. "I need to return to your property as soon as possible. Is tomorrow morning acceptable?" "What kind of complication?" Sarah asked, alarm rising in her chest. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. 9 o'clock?" "Yes, that's fine," Sarah agreed, mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. After hanging up, Sarah walked immediately to the pasture where Liberty and Chance were enjoying the afternoon sun. The mare looked up at her approach, something like recognition in her gaze. Sarah leaned against the fence, studying the beautiful wild creature who had unexpectedly become so important to her. "What am I going to do if they take you away?" she whispered, the question carried away by the gentle Montana breeze. Liberty, of course, offered no answer, but continued watching Sarah with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations of wild horses, who had roamed these lands long before humans drew their arbitrary boundaries. That night, Sarah barely slept, her mind cycling through arguments, appeals, and alternatives. By dawn, she had resolved to fight with every legal means available to keep liberty and chance. They deserved better than a holding pen or the uncertainty of placement with strangers who couldn't possibly understand what they had endured. When Agent Foster's SUV appeared on the horizon at precisely 9 o'clock, Sarah was waiting by the gate, medical records in hand, determination set in every line of her face, but this time Foster wasn't alone. A second vehicle followed, a large pickup truck pulling a horse trailer emblazoned with the BLM logo. Sarah's heart sank like a stone. Sarah strode toward the vehicles, each step heavy with dread. Foster climbed out of her SUV, clipboard in hand as always, her expression unreadable. From the truck emerged a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "Dr. Mitchell," Foster greeted her with a professional nod. "This is Regional Director James Harmon. He oversees wild horse management for this district." The man extended a calloused hand, which Sarah shook automatically, her mind still fixated on the ominous horse trailer. "Dr. Mitchell, I've heard a great deal about your situation here," Harmon said, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority. Agent Foster's report was quite thorough. Sarah straightened her shoulders, preparing for battle. "I was told there's a complication with my adoption application. I assume that's why you've brought transportation for liberty and chance." Harmon and Foster exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't interpret. "Why don't we discuss this somewhere comfortable?" Harmon suggested. "Then we can take a look at the horses." Reluctantly, Sarah led them to her porch, where rocking chairs offered a view of the pasture. Liberty and Chance were visible in the distance, the mare's head raised in alert awareness of the strangers on the property. "Beautiful animals," Harmon commented, settling into a chair with a slight grimace that suggested old injuries. Foster's photos didn't do them justice. "They're exceptional," Sarah agreed cautiously. "Now, about this complication." Harmon nodded, his expression turning serious. "Dr. Mitchell, I'll be direct. Your situation presents us with an unusual challenge. Under normal circumstances, these horses would have been transferred to a BLM facility immediately upon discovery." "They would have died," Sarah interjected. "Perhaps," Harmon acknowledged with a slight incline of his head. "The point is, your intervention, while admirable from a humanitarian perspective, creates a procedural problem. These horses never officially entered the BLM system." Sarah frowned. "I don't understand. How is that a problem for my adoption application?" Foster leaned forward. "Technically, Dr. Mitchell, you can't adopt animals that aren't in our system. They would need to be transported to a holding facility, processed, and then made available for adoption through proper channels." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying you need to take them away just to bring them back through official adoption?" "That's standard procedure," Foster confirmed, though her tone suggested she might not entirely agree with it. Sarah stood abruptly, unable to contain her frustration. "That's absurd. Liberty is just beginning to recover from severe trauma. Chance has never known any home but this one. Transporting them to a holding facility, surrounding them with unfamiliar horses and handlers, it could undo all the progress they've made." Harmon raised a hand in a calming gesture. "That's why I'm here, Dr. Mitchell. Agent Foster's report raised some valid concerns about the welfare of these particular animals. As regional director, I have limited discretionary authority in exceptional cases." Sarah's heart quickened. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Harmon said slowly, "that I have the ability to authorize an on-site assessment and processing. The horses would be officially documented, microchipped, and entered into our system. but they wouldn't need to leave your property while the adoption application is processed. Relief washed over Sarah so intensely that she had to sit back down. You can do that? In exceptional circumstances, yes. It's rare, but not unprecedented. Harmon gestured toward the pasture. Agent Foster's documentation of the mare's medical condition and the unusual bond they've formed with you makes a compelling case for special handling. Sarah looked to Foster, surprise and gratitude mingling in her expression. The agent offered a small, professional smile in return. My job is to advocate for the well-being of wild horses, Dr. Mitchell. Sometimes that means working within the system to find creative solutions. The trailer? Sarah asked, glancing toward the BLM vehicle. Equipment, Harmon explained. Portable chutes, microchipping supplies, documentation station. We'll need to formally process the horses here today. For the first time since their arrival, Sarah allowed herself to hope. What do you need from me? The next few hours transformed Sarah's quiet property into a hive of activity. Additional BLM staff arrived to assist with the temporary processing station. Sarah watched nervously as they assembled equipment in a corner of the pasture, a small chute system designed to safely restrain horses for examination and microchipping. Will this frighten them? She asked Harmon, who was overseeing the setup. Possibly, he admitted. But it's necessary, and it's far less traumatic than transportation to a holding facility would be. Your presence will help keep them calm. When the time came to bring Liberty and Chance to the processing station, Sarah approached them slowly in the pasture, speaking in low, soothing tones. Liberty's ears flicked forward in recognition, though her posture remained tense, aware of the strangers and unfamiliar equipment nearby. "It's okay, girl," Sarah murmured, reaching out to stroke the mare's neck. "I know this is scary, but I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you or Chance." With gentle persistence, Sarah managed to lead Liberty toward the chute, Chance following trustingly in their wake. The mare balked momentarily at the sight of the metal structure but continued forward with Sarah's encouragement. The processing itself was swift and efficient. Liberty submitted to examination with tense tolerance, her trust in Sarah evident in her willingness to endure the unfamiliar handling. Chance proved more challenging, his youthful energy making him squirm during microchipping. But the BLM staff worked with professional competence, minimizing stress to both animals. "They're officially in the system now," Foster informed Sarah as the equipment was being dismantled. Tag numbers WH2507 and WH2508. "Liberty and Chance," Sarah corrected gently. "Those are their names." Foster smiled more warmly than before. "Liberty and Chance," she agreed, making a note on her clipboard. "The adoption application will take time to process. Background checks, final facility inspection, approval from the state office, but Director Harmon has authorized a temporary custody arrangement while the paperwork is being processed." "What does that mean?" "It means they stay here with you, under BLM supervision," Harmon explained, approaching from the pasture where Liberty and Chance had already returned to grazing, apparently recovered from their ordeal. "You'll continue their care as before, with regular check-ins from Agent Foster or another representative." Sarah felt lightheaded with relief. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate to express her gratitude. Harmon studied her thoughtfully. "You know, Dr. Mitchell, in my 30 years with the Bureau, I've seen all kinds of relationships between humans and wild horses. Some people want to break them, dominate them, turn them into something they're not. Others romanticize them, forget they're powerful animals with their own nature and needs." He paused, glancing toward Liberty. "What I see here is different. There's respect in how you interact with that mare. You honor what she is, not just what you want her to be." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of his observation. "She taught me that. From the beginning, she's been making choices, to trust, to stay, To heal. I just tried to listen. As the BLM personnel packed up their equipment and prepared to depart, Sarah walked back to the pasture fence. Liberty had moved closer, watching the activity with alert interest, Chance half hidden behind her protective form. When the mare noticed Sarah, she approached the fence with a calm deliberation that still amazed the veterinarian. "We did it, Liberty," Sarah said softly. "You're staying home." The wild mare regarded her with those intelligent eyes that had seen freedom and captivity, birth and death, pain and healing. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Sarah's eyes, Liberty lowered her proud head and gently pressed her muzzle against Sarah's outstretched hand, a moment of connection freely given, impossible to demand, and all the more precious for it. Autumn descended on the Montana landscape, painting the hills in russet and gold. 3 months had passed since the BLM's visit, and Sarah's property had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Liberty and Chance thrived under her care, their coats growing thicker in preparation for the approaching winter. The formal adoption process continued at the glacial pace of government bureaucracy, but the temporary custody arrangement meant they remained with Sarah, their futures increasingly intertwined with hers. Agent Foster visited every 2 weeks as required, her initial professional detachment gradually warming into something resembling friendship. She would arrive with her clipboard and camera, document Liberty and Chance's condition, then often stay for coffee on Sarah's porch, sharing stories of other wild horses in her jurisdiction. "Your case has attracted attention at the regional office," Foster mentioned during one such visit, watching as Liberty and Chance grazed contentedly in the pasture. "Not everyone agrees with Director Harmon's decision to let them stay here during processing." Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "Should I be worried?" Foster shook her head. "Harmon stands by his decision, and honestly, the documentation I've been providing makes a compelling case. These horses are thriving here in a way they might not elsewhere." It was true. Liberty had completely recovered from her ordeal, her strength and vitality fully restored. The scars she carried were visible only to those who knew to look for them. Chance had grown into a handsome young colt, his playful spirit matched by a growing confidence. Together, they had established clear boundaries with Sarah, accepting her presence, even seeking it at times, while maintaining the essential wildness that defined them. Sarah had respected those boundaries, never pushing for more connection than Liberty offered freely. Sometimes the mare would approach the fence when Sarah sat on her porch, standing in silent companionship as the sun set over the mountains. Other days she would keep her distance, roaming the far reaches of the pasture with Chance at her side, her proud head raised to the wind as if remembering the unfenced freedom of her past. On a crisp October morning, Sarah was surprised by an unexpected visitor. Tom's truck pulled up her driveway, but instead of the old rancher behind the wheel, a younger man emerged, tall and lean, with Tom's weathered features softened by youth. "Dr. Mitchell," he called, approaching with a tentative smile. "I'm Michael Jackson, Tom's son. He asked me to stop by." "Is Tom all right?" Sarah asked, immediately concerned. The old rancher had become a steady presence in her life, stopping by regularly to check on Liberty and Chance's progress. "Dad's fine, just laid up with his back again," Michael assured her. "Stubborn old man won't admit he can't buck hay bales like he used to." His gaze drifted to the pasture where Liberty and Chance were visible in the distance. "So these are the famous wild horses I've been hearing about?" Sarah nodded, studying Michael curiously. Tom had mentioned his son occasionally, a wildlife biologist working with wolf reintroduction programs in Wyoming. "Would you like to see them? They're usually more active in the mornings." Michael's eyes lit with professional interest. "I'd like that very much." As they walked toward the pasture, Sarah found herself unexpectedly self-conscious. Michael had an easy confidence about him, his movements fluid and purposeful. She caught herself smoothing her hair, then immediately felt foolish for the gesture. "Dad says you're fighting the BLM to keep them," Michael commented as they reached the fence. "Not fighting exactly," Sarah corrected, leaning against the weathered wood. "We've reached an understanding. I'm going through the proper channels for adoption." Liberty had noticed their presence and was watching from a distance, her posture alert but not alarmed. Chance grazed nearby, occasionally glancing up with youthful curiosity. "That's the mare?" Michael asked, his voice lowering instinctively. "She's magnificent." "Liberty," Sarah supplied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "And the colt is Chance." "Liberty," Michael repeated, a smile touching his lips. "Appropriate name for a wild thing." Something in his tone resonated with Sarah, an understanding that went beyond casual appreciation. "Your father mentioned you work with wildlife conservation." Michael nodded, his eyes still on Liberty. "Wolf reintroduction primarily, but my research focuses on human-wildlife conflict resolution, finding ways for wild animals and humans to coexist without either side losing what matters most." "That sounds fascinating," Sarah said sincerely. "It can be," Michael agreed. "Also frustrating, heartbreaking, and occasionally miraculous, not unlike veterinary medicine, I imagine." Their conversation flowed easily as they watched Liberty and Chance. Michael asked thoughtful questions about their rescue and rehabilitation, listening intently to Sarah's answers without the skepticism she'd encountered from many others. When Chance ventured closer to investigate the visitors, Michael remained perfectly still, respecting the colt's boundaries in a way that impressed Sarah. "You have a gift with them," he observed later as they walked back toward the house. "Dad wasn't exaggerating about the connection you've built." Sarah felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "I think the gift is mutual. Liberty taught me as much as I've taught her." "The best relationships with wild animals usually work that way," Michael said with a knowing smile. "Mutual respect, boundaries, patience. My wolves have been excellent teachers too." They reached Sarah's porch, and an awkward moment ensued as Michael prepared to leave. "I should get back," he said finally. "Dad asked me to drop off some hay too. I'll unload it by your barn." "Tell Tom thank you," Sarah replied, "and it was nice meeting you, Michael." He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Likewise, Dr. Mitchell." "Sarah," she corrected. "Sarah," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "I'll be in town for a few weeks helping Dad with the ranch. Maybe I could stop by again. I'd love to hear more about your work here." After he departed, Sarah found herself standing on the porch longer than necessary, watching his truck disappear down the road. The encounter had left her with an unexpected lightness, a reminder that her world had narrowed to Liberty, Chance, and her veterinary practice in recent months. That evening, as Sarah completed her daily journal entry documenting Liberty and Chance's progress, she found herself adding a personal note about Michael's visit. The admission felt significant somehow, an acknowledgement that her own life continued to unfold alongside the stories she shared with the wild horses in her care. The following week brought the first snowfall of the season, earlier than usual. Sarah woke to a world transformed, the familiar landscape draped in pristine white. Her first thought was of Liberty and Chance. While the barn offered shelter, they often chose to remain in the pasture, their wild instincts preferring open space to enclosure. Pulling on her heavy coat and boots, Sarah made her way through the ankle-deep snow to check on them. The sight that greeted her at the pasture stopped her in her tracks. Liberty stood in the center of the white expanse, snow dusting her dark coat, looking every bit the wild creature she was. Chance pranced around her, delighting in the novel sensation of snow beneath his hooves, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. The beauty of the moment caught in Sarah's throat. These magnificent animals against the snow-covered Montana landscape, free yet safe, wild yet connected to her through bonds of trust that defied easy categorization. As if sensing her presence, Liberty turned, her dark eyes finding Sarah across the distance. For a breathtaking moment they regarded each other, woman and mare, each sovereign in their own way, joined by choice rather than compulsion. Then Liberty did something unprecedented. With deliberate steps, she walked towards Sarah, Chance following curiously behind. The mare stopped at the fence, her breath mingling with the cold air, and stretched her neck forward. Sarah raised her hand slowly, palm flat, and Liberty pressed her muzzle against it, a gesture that felt like both greeting and affirmation. "Good morning to you too," Sarah said softly, wonder filling her voice. The moment was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Sarah turned reluctantly from Liberty to see Agent Foster's now familiar SUV navigating the snowy driveway. But today, something was different. Foster wasn't alone in the vehicle, and the set of her shoulders as she emerged told Sarah that this wasn't a routine visit. Sarah's stomach tightened as Foster stepped out of the vehicle, her expression uncharacteristically tense. Behind her emerged a man Sarah didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing an expensive-looking coat that seemed at odds with the rural Montana setting. His polished city shoes sank awkwardly into the snow as he followed Foster toward Sarah. "Dr. Mitchell," Foster greeted her, a warning in her eyes that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. This is Edward Blackwood from the Department of the Interior's Washington office." Blackwood extended a gloved hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Dr. Mitchell, a pleasure. I've heard a great deal about your unique situation here." Sarah shook his hand briefly, anxiety building in her chest. "What brings someone from Washington to my little corner of Montana, Mr. Blackwood?" "Oversight," he replied smoothly. "The department occasionally reviews special cases within the Wild Horse Management Program. Yours has attracted attention." Sarah glanced at Foster, whose carefully neutral expression offered no reassurance. Behind them, Liberty had retreated from the fence, positioning herself protectively near Chance, her posture alert and wary. "I'd be happy to show you around," Sarah offered, maintaining a professional demeanor despite her growing concern. "Though I wasn't expecting visitors. The snow came earlier than forecast." "Actually," Blackwood said, pulling a tablet from his coat, "I've already reviewed the extensive documentation Agent Foster has provided. Very thorough." He nodded approvingly toward Foster before turning his attention back to Sarah. "I'm here primarily to discuss next steps." "Next steps?" Sarah repeated, a chill that had nothing to do with the snow seeping into her bones. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere warmer," Foster suggested, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sarah led them to her house, hyper-aware of Liberty watching their retreat from the pasture. Inside, she busied herself making coffee, grateful for the routine task that gave her a moment to collect her thoughts. "Your property is impressive, Dr. Mitchell," Blackwood commented, accepting the steaming mug Sarah offered. "Quite isolated, though. Have you considered how that isolation affects the socialization needs of wild horses in captivity?" The question carried an undercurrent that set Sarah's nerves on edge. "Liberty and Chance aren't in captivity, Mr. Blackwood. They have 20 acres to roam and they choose to stay here. The adoption application clearly outlines my approach to their care." Blackwood nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, I've reviewed your application. Very comprehensive. But therein lies our concern." He set his mug down carefully. "The Wild Horse Adoption Program exists to manage population levels on public lands, while finding suitable domestic situations for excess animals. It was never intended as a mechanism for creating private wildlife sanctuaries." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. I'm not sure I understand your point. My point, Dr. Mitchell, is that your application falls outside standard parameters. You're essentially requesting permission to maintain these horses in a semi-wild state on private property, indefinitely. Is that a problem? Sarah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. They're thriving here. Isn't that the ultimate goal of the program? Foster cleared her throat. Dr. Mitchell has provided exceptional care, she interjected. My reports consistently show positive outcomes for both animals. Blackwood acknowledged this with a slight nod. No one questions the quality of care. The issue is precedent. If we approve this unconventional arrangement, what's to prevent others from claiming special circumstances? The entire management system could be undermined. Sarah felt anger rising beneath her fear. These are living creatures, Mr. Blackwood, not policy abstractions. Liberty nearly died giving birth. She's formed a bond with me that defies conventional understanding. Separating them from this environment now would be traumatic and potentially dangerous. Which brings me to my actual purpose here, Blackwood said, his tone softening slightly. The department has been developing new protocols for exceptional cases, situations that don't fit neatly into existing regulations, but merit special consideration. Your case has been selected for a pilot program. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by this unexpected turn. What kind of pilot program? A special designation, Conservation Ambassador. It would allow these particular horses to remain under your care permanently, but with certain conditions. Blackwood consulted his tablet. Regular monitoring by BLM personnel, educational components for the public, participation in research on wild horse behavior and rehabilitation. Hope flickered cautiously in Sarah's chest. And Liberty and Chance would stay here? With me? Provided all conditions are met, yes, Blackwood confirmed. But I need to be very clear, Dr. Mitchell. This arrangement would be unique. It doesn't constitute approval for others to remove wild horses from public lands under the guise of rescue. Sarah sat back, processing this information. What would these educational components involve? Controlled opportunities for the public to observe wild horses in a rehabilitative setting. School groups, university students, perhaps limited public tours. Blackwood's expression turned shrewd. The program needs positive publicity, Dr. Mitchell. These horses could become ambassadors for responsible management practices. Sarah thought immediately of Liberty, proud, cautious Liberty, who had only recently begun to truly trust her. How would the Mare react to strangers regularly invading her space? Yet the alternative, losing Liberty and Chance to the standard adoption process, or worse, a holding facility, was unthinkable. I'd need to introduce any changes gradually, she said carefully. Liberty's trust was hard-won. Too much disruption could set back her rehabilitation. Foster nodded encouragingly. The proposal includes a phased implementation, Sarah. No one expects overnight changes. The use of her first name wasn't lost on Sarah, a subtle signal that Foster was advocating for her behind the scenes. When would this program begin? Sarah asked. Officially? Next quarter, Blackwood replied. But we'd need your agreement in principle immediately. There's paperwork, planning, assessments to complete. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered pasture where Liberty and Chance remained visible in the distance. Every instinct told her to protect them from intrusion, to maintain the peaceful sanctuary she'd created. Yet the bureaucratic reality was clear. Without this compromise, she might lose them entirely. I need to think about this, she said finally, turning back to face Blackwood and Foster. Liberty and Chance aren't conventional domestic animals. Their well-being has to be the priority in any arrangement. Blackwood looked like he wanted to push for an immediate answer, but nodded instead. Of course, but we'll need your decision within the week. This opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. After they departed, Sarah remained by the window, watching as their vehicle carefully navigated the snowy driveway. The morning's peaceful beauty had been shattered, replaced by the weighty reality of decisions that would shape not only her future but Liberty and Chance's as well. She was still standing there when another vehicle appeared, Tom's truck with Michael behind the wheel. He parked where Foster and Blackwood had been moments before and stepped out, carrying what looked like a bale of hay. Seeing him brought an unexpected sense of relief, a feeling that surprised Sarah with its intensity. When he knocked on the door, his face ruddy from the cold, Sarah found herself sharing the morning's developments before he'd even fully entered the house. "A pilot program," Michael repeated, his expression thoughtful as he accepted the coffee Sarah offered. "That's actually innovative for a federal agency, especially one as traditionally rigid as the BLM. But is it right for Liberty and Chance?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had been circling in her mind. "Strangers coming and going, educational tours. It's not what I envisioned for them." Michael considered this, his eyes serious. "What was your vision, Sarah?" The question stopped her short. "I just wanted them to be safe, to heal, to have freedom within protection." "And they will," Michael said gently. "But maybe there's something more here, something important." "What do you mean?" "People misunderstand wild horses, fear them, romanticize them, treat them as symbols rather than sentient beings with their own needs and natures." Michael leaned forward, passion evident in his voice. "What if Liberty and Chance could change that? Help people see wild horses as they truly are?" Sarah hadn't considered this perspective. "You think I should accept?" "I think," Michael said carefully, "that you have an opportunity to do something meaningful, not just for these two horses, but potentially for wild horses everywhere. That's worth considering, isn't it?" Outside, the snow continued to fall, adding another layer of white to the transformed landscape. In the pasture, Liberty stood watching the house, as if aware that decisions affecting her future were being made within its walls. The week that followed Blackwood's visit became a crucible of reflection for Sarah. Each morning she sat on her porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching Liberty and Chance in the pasture, their dark silhouettes stark against the snow-covered landscape. Their freedom within boundaries, was it enough, was it right? The questions circled in her mind like birds seeking a place to land. Michael stopped by regularly, sometimes bringing supplies from town, other times simply offering his company. His perspective as a wildlife biologist provided a counterpoint to Sarah's veterinary instincts, and their conversations often stretched late into the evening, ranging from philosophical debates about wildlife management to practical considerations for Liberty and Chance's future. "The crucial thing," Michael said during one such discussion, "is maintaining their agency. Wild animals need choice, even in controlled environments." Sarah nodded, understanding deeply. "That's what's always guided my approach with Liberty. She stays because she chooses to, not because she has no alternative." "And that could continue, even with the educational component," Michael suggested. "Structure the program around observation rather than interaction. Let visitors see the horses on Liberty's terms." The idea resonated with Sarah, a compromise that might protect what mattered most while fulfilling the program's requirements. Still, doubt lingered. How would Liberty react to strangers regularly appearing at the fence line? Would the mare retreat to the far corners of the pasture, undoing the trust they'd built? Or worse, would she attempt to escape, taking Chance with her into a winter landscape that offered few resources for survival? 3 days before Blackwood's deadline, a snowstorm swept through the valley, bringing howling winds and plummeting temperatures. Sarah spent the evening in the barn, ensuring the stalls were prepared if Liberty and Chance sought shelter from the elements. The wild mare had used the barn sporadically since summer, sometimes bringing Chance inside during heavy rain, other times preferring the open pasture regardless of weather. As the storm intensified, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave the barn. She settled onto a hay bale, wrapped in her heaviest coat, a lantern casting golden light around the empty stall she'd prepared. The wind rattled the sturdy structure, but inside all was still and quiet, the familiar scents of hay and wood creating a cocoon of warmth. Sarah must have dozed off because she woke with a start to the sound of movement outside. The barn door, which she'd left partially open, swung wider as a dark shape appeared in the entrance. Liberty stood silhouetted against the swirling snow, Chance close behind her, both dusted with white. The mare paused at the threshold, her breath visible in the cold air, eyes finding Sarah in the lantern light. For a long moment, neither moved, woman and wild horse regarding each other across the space. Then, with deliberate steps, Liberty entered the barn, guiding Chance toward the prepared stall. Sarah remained perfectly still, scarcely breathing as the mare settled her foal in the clean straw before turning to face Sarah directly. "Hello, beautiful," Sarah said softly, the words barely audible above the storm. Liberty approached slowly, snow melting on her dark coat. When she reached Sarah, she lowered her proud head and exhaled a warm breath that misted in the chill air. The gesture felt like communication, acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. Sarah raised her hand, palm flat, and Liberty pressed her muzzle against it, a connection now familiar, yet never taken for granted. "What am I going to do?" Sarah whispered, the question meant for herself as much as the mare. "How do I protect you while sharing what you've taught me?" Liberty's dark eyes held no answers, only the unfathomable depth that had captivated Sarah from their first encounter. Yet in that silent exchange, something clarified in Sarah's mind, a recognition of responsibility that extended beyond these two horses to something larger. The decision, when it finally crystallized, felt less like a choice and more like an acknowledgement of a path already chosen. By rescuing Liberty that spring morning, Sarah had set in motion events that couldn't be contained within her private world. The mare's story, her suffering, her resilience, her extraordinary trust, carried meaning that demanded sharing. When the storm cleared 2 days later, Sarah called Blackwood's office and accepted the Conservation Ambassador designation, with specific conditions she'd outlined carefully. Liberty and Chance would remain on her property permanently. Educational activities would be introduced gradually, with Liberty's comfort as the determining factor for frequency and scope. Research would be observational only, never invasive. "These terms are non-negotiable," Sarah told Blackwood firmly. "Liberty and Chance are partners in this arrangement, not subjects. Their well-being comes first, always." To her surprise, Blackwood agreed with minimal resistance. "Your dedication to these horses is precisely why you're ideal for this pilot program, Dr. Mitchell. We want to demonstrate that conservation can be compassionate." Foster arrived the following week with the formal agreement, her expression openly pleased as she handed Sarah the document. "You did well," she said, watching as Sarah reviewed the terms. "This could change how we approach wild horse management in cases like Liberty's." "Let's hope so," Sarah replied, signing her name on the designated line. "They deserve better than holding pens and hasty adoptions." Foster nodded, taking back the signed agreement. "There's something else," she said, retrieving an envelope from her jacket. "Director Harmon asked me to deliver this personally." Inside was a formal certificate designating Liberty and Chance as the first official conservation ambassadors under the new program, along with a handwritten note from Harmon. "Some wild things teach us more in captivity than they ever could running free. Protect them well." Winter deepened around Sarah's property, transforming the landscape into a crystalline wonderland. Liberty and Chance adapted to the changing conditions, their coats growing thicker, their bodies stronger. On all but the harshest nights, they still preferred the open pasture to the barn, finding shelter in a small grove of pines at the property's edge. Michael's visits continued, evolving into a comfortable routine that Sarah found herself anticipating with growing warmth. His insights on wildlife behavior proved invaluable as she began planning how to implement the educational components of the program come spring. Together, they designed observation blinds that would allow visitors to watch Liberty and Chance without disrupting their natural behavior, and developed educational materials that emphasize the complexity of wild horse social structures and ecological roles. "You're creating something important here," Michael told her one evening as they sat by the fire, blueprints spread across Sarah's coffee table. "A new model for conservation that honors the wild while creating connection." Sarah smiled, the compliment touching something deep within her. "I hope so. Though truthfully, Liberty is the one doing the important work. I'm just following her lead." January brought the coldest night of the winter, temperatures plummeting to dangerous levels that concerned Sarah even for her well-insulated barn. She spent the day preparing extra bedding and checking the barn's heating system, expecting Liberty and Chance would seek shelter from the extreme cold. As dusk fell and the temperature continued to drop, Sarah watched anxiously from her porch. Liberty and Chance remained in the pasture, seemingly unconcerned by the biting wind that cut through Sarah's heaviest coat. Darkness descended fully, and still they hadn't approached the barn. Unable to quell her worry, Sarah pulled on her warmest clothes and ventured out into the frigid night, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, eventually finding Liberty and Chance in their pine grove shelter. The mare stood alert at Sarah's approach, Chance huddled against her for warmth. "It's too cold, even for you," Sarah called softly, her voice carrying in the still air. "Come to the barn, please." Liberty watched her for a long moment, then began walking towards Sarah, nudging Chance to follow. The gesture, this wild creature responding to human concern, never ceased to amaze Sarah. Together they made their way to the barn where warmth and safety awaited. As Sarah settled them in their stall, she realized that the trust between them, the mutual respect, was what visitors needed to witness. Not a wild horse tamed, but a relationship built on choice and understanding. It was a story worth telling, a model worth sharing, even if it meant opening her private sanctuary to the wider world. That night, as temperatures outside reached record lows, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable months earlier. Instead of returning to her house, she dragged her cot into the barn and set it up near Liberty and Chance's stall, wanting to monitor the heating system through the night. What happened next would become the cornerstone of the Conservation Ambassador program's origin story, recounted to countless visitors in the years that followed. Sarah woke to unfamiliar weight and warmth pressing against her side. The barn was dark except for the faint glow of the heating system's indicator lights casting shadows across the wooden beams above. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Why was she in the barn? Then memory returned. The record cold, her concern for Liberty and Chance, her decision to stay and monitor the temperature through the night. But the weight against her, that was unexpected. Sarah turned her head slowly and found herself looking directly into Liberty's dark, intelligent eyes. The wild mare had somehow opened her stall door, something Sarah had seen her do once before, and was now lying on the cot beside Sarah, her large body carefully positioned to share warmth without crushing the human who had saved her life. Chance stood nearby, watching curiously, his breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Sarah remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. In all the months since Liberty's rescue, the mare had accepted Sarah's presence, even sought it at times, but always maintained the careful distance of a wild creature. This deliberate closeness, this choice to lie beside her, was unprecedented. "Liberty," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What are you doing, girl?" The mare blinked slowly, her gaze never leaving Sarah's face. There was something in that look, a communication beyond words, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended the boundaries between wild and tame, human and animal. In that moment, Sarah understood what Liberty had been teaching her all along. True freedom existed not in the absence of bonds, but in the choice to form them. As dawn approached, Sarah dozed again, lulled by Liberty's warmth and the rhythmic sound of her breathing. She woke to the sensation of movement as the mare rose gracefully from the cot, nudging Chance toward their stall as the first pale light filtered through the barn windows. That morning, as Sarah checked Liberty and Chance for any ill effects from the extreme cold, she felt a shift in their relationship, not a domestication of the wild, but a deepening of mutual trust that honored Liberty's essential nature while acknowledging their connection. The story might have ended there, a private moment between woman and horse significant only to them. But fate had other plans. Michael arrived mid-morning, concern written across his features as he navigated the still treacherous driveway. "I came as soon as the roads were clear," he explained, following Sarah into the kitchen where she was preparing coffee. "That was the coldest night in 50 years, according to the Weather Service. Are Liberty and Chance all right?" Sarah couldn't contain her smile as she recounted the night's extraordinary events. Michael listened, amazement dawning on his face. "That's remarkable," he said when she finished. "Wild horses almost never initiate that kind of physical closeness with humans. It goes against their most basic instincts." "Liberty isn't just any wild horse," Sarah replied, the simple truth of it warming her more than the coffee in her hands. Later that day, Agent Foster arrived for a scheduled check-in, accompanied by a photographer the department had commissioned to document the Conservation Ambassador program. Sarah hesitated when Foster asked to photograph Liberty and Chance in the barn. "They're usually in the pasture during the day," she explained. "I don't want to confine them for a photo opportunity." But as if hearing her name, Liberty appeared at the barn door, Chance following close behind. The mare entered voluntarily, moving with the fluid grace that still captivated Sarah after all these months. The photographer, a young woman named Maya, gasped softly at the sight. "She's even more beautiful than the reports described," Maya whispered, raising her camera. "May I?" Sarah nodded, watching as Liberty positioned herself near the stall, her posture proud yet relaxed. As Maya began taking photos, Sarah shared the story of the previous night, Liberty opening the stall, lying beside her on the cot, sharing warmth during the coldest hours. Foster listened with growing excitement. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of connection the program wants to highlight. The mutual respect, the choice on Liberty's part. Would you mind if Maya documents the cot as well? It would make a powerful visual." Sarah agreed, and Maya set up her equipment near the simple cot that still remained in the barn. As she adjusted her lighting, something unexpected happened. Liberty, who had been watching the proceedings with calm interest, walked deliberately to the cot and with a grace that belied her size, lowered herself onto it just as she had the night before. The barn fell silent. Maya, after a moment of stunned immobility, began capturing images with quiet efficiency. Foster stood wide-eyed beside Sarah, who felt tears welling at this public confirmation of the private moment she'd experienced. "She's showing us," Sarah said softly. "She's choosing to show us." The photographs Maya took that day would become iconic. A wild mare lying voluntarily on a human bed, her intelligent eyes gazing directly into the camera with unmistakable self-possession. When the Conservation Ambassador program officially launched that spring, the image appeared on educational materials, websites, and eventually gallery exhibits focused on human-wildlife relationships. Visitors began arriving at Sarah's property once the snow melted, small groups carefully screened and prepared with educational materials before their observational experiences. To everyone's surprise, Liberty did not retreat from these controlled human intrusions but seemed to embrace her role as ambassador, often appearing near the observation blinds with Chance at her side, allowing strangers glimpses into their wild yet connected lives. "She understands what we're doing," Michael remarked one afternoon as they watched a group of university students sketching Liberty from a distance. "Somehow she knows this matters." Sarah nodded, the same thought having occurred to her many times. "She's teaching them what she taught me, that wildness isn't something to be tamed or feared, but respected and preserved, even when it exists alongside us." As spring blossomed into summer, Liberty and Chance thrived. The colt grew rapidly, his playful spirit maturing into the confident bearing of a young stallion. Liberty remained the heart of the program, her very presence a living testament to resilience, adaptation, and the complex beauty of relationships that honor difference rather than erase it. On the anniversary of Liberty's rescue, Sarah organized a small gathering at the property. Foster, Harmon, Michael, Tom, and a few others who had been instrumental in creating the Conservation Ambassador program. As twilight painted the Montana sky in lavender and gold, they raised glasses in toast to the wild mare who had changed not only Sarah's life, but potentially the future of wild horse management. "To Liberty," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the gathering, "who taught us that sometimes the most meaningful connections are formed not by controlling wildness, but by respecting it." Later that evening, as the guests departed and quiet settled over the property, Sarah walked to the pasture fence where Liberty stood watching the last light fade from the sky. Chance grazed nearby, his coat gleaming in the dusk. "One year," Sarah said softly, extending her hand palm up in the gesture that had become their ritual of connection. Liberty lowered her proud head, pressing her muzzle against Sarah's palm, acknowledgement, acceptance, perhaps even affection. In that touch existed all the complexities of their shared journey, the pain of near death, the miracle of survival, the patient building of trust, and finally, the choice to connect across the boundaries that separated their worlds. Not wild, not tame, but something altogether new. A relationship forged in crisis, tempered by time, and ultimately defined by mutual choice. As darkness fell completely, Liberty remained at the fence, her presence a silent affirmation of what Sarah had come to believe most deeply, that the most profound healing happens not when we bend others to our will, but when we create spaces where both freedom and connection can flourish. Behind them, the barn stood as a testament to their extraordinary night, the wild mare who chose a human bed, and in doing so, changed the meaning of sanctuary for both of them. Not a place of confinement, but a space of possibility where the wild and the human could meet, not in compromise, but in mutual recognition of what each had to offer the other. That was Liberty's greatest gift, and the story that would inspire thousands in the years to come.